The chapel door creaked open like a confession no one wanted to hear. And there she stood, Juliet, in a gown that clung like a lie she had sewn herself. Her eyes locked on mine across the aisle, not the groom's, and in that stolen second before the organ swelled, she mouthed words that shattered the stained glass of my resolve. "Forgive me, Addie." I forgave her with a kiss I never gave. One that lingered in the air between us like smoke from a fire we both knew would consume everything. The summer in Monroe, Georgia, hung heavy as Spanish moss, draping the live oaks that lined the cracked sidewalks of our family home. It was the kind of heat that seeped into your bones, making every breath feel like a surrender. And in the weeks leading up to Harlan's wedding, it mirrored the slow burn of secrets festering in my chest. I was 28, the younger sibling by 3 years, the one who had always been the shadow to his light Harlan, with his easy charm and the family lumber business that promised stability in a town where dreams either took root or withered under the judgmental gaze of neighbors who knew your sins before you committed them. Monroe wasn't just a place. It was a ledger of reputations, where the First Baptist Church steeple pierced the sky like a constant reminder that grace came with strings attached. Juliet Hale had blown into town 2 years earlier like a nor'easter off the Atlantic, her laugh cutting through the humid air at the county fair where Harlan first spotted her tending a booth for her family's struggling orchard up in the hills. She was from Macon originally, but carried the faint lilt of old money faded by bad harvests and worse decisions. Her father a widower who gambled away the estate, leaving her to piece together a life from heirloom peaches and borrowed finery. Harlan fell hard as he always did, seeing in her the perfect counterpoint to his grounded routine. Someone who whispered about Paris in the cab of his pickup truck, her fingers tracing patterns on the dashboard as if mapping escapes neither of them would ever take. I watched from the porch swing that first night they came back to the house, her head on his shoulder, and felt a twist in my gut that I dismissed as indigestion from Mama's cornbread. But it wasn't indigestion. It was the way her gaze lingered on me when she thought no one noticed, a flicker like sunlight through storm clouds, warm and fleeting. We'd met properly at a church picnic that spring, me in my faded jeans and Harlan's old flannel, helping set up folding tables under the pavilion while thunder rumbled distant threats. "You're the sister," she'd said, extending a hand sticky from peeling fruit, her smile disarming as a loaded question. "Addison, right? Harlan talks about you like you're the one holding the family compass." I shook her hand, feeling the calluses from orchard work rough against my palm, and something unspoken passed between us, a recognition perhaps of lives lived in quiet rebellion against the roles we'd been handed. In Monroe, women like us didn't question the script. Marry well, bear children, fade into the wallpaper of potlucks and prayer circles. Juliet's eyes, green as the ivy choking the cemetery gates, held a map to elsewhere, and for the first time in years, I wondered what it would feel like to follow. As the wedding planning unfolded, our paths crossed more often, necessity weaving us into reluctant allies. Mama, with her pearl-clutching insistence on tradition, had roped me into the floral committee, and Juliet, ever the gracious fiancée, tagged along to the florist in town, a dusty shop called Petal and Thorn where bougainvillea wilted in the window like forgotten promises. We'd spend afternoons there debating peonies versus magnolias, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and her perfume, something light like jasmine stolen from a garden at dusk. Harlan was always late, tied up with inventory at the mill, leaving us to fill the silences with small talk that edged toward confessions. "This town's got teeth," she'd say, twisting a stem between her fingers until it snapped. "Bites down when you least expect it." I'd nod, thinking of my own hidden edges. The journals tucked under my mattress, pages filled with sketches of women from old movies, their faces soft in the glow of silver screens I'd never afford to escape to. No one in Monroe knew about the ache that woke me at night, the one that whispered of hands that weren't Harlan's, of lips that curved in ways his never would. One evening as the sun dipped low and painted the shop in amber, Juliet reached across the counter for a ribbon, her arm brushing mine. The contact was electric, a spark that jumped from skin to soul, and she froze, her breath catching like a record scratch in the quiet. "Sorry," she murmured, but her voice was low, laced with something heavier than apology. I pulled back, heart hammering against my ribs, and busied myself with labels, pretending the heat in my cheeks was from the fading day. That night, alone in my room with the ceiling fan whirring lazy circles, I replayed the moment, letting it unravel in my mind like a thread pulled loose from a seam. What if I hadn't pulled away? What if Monroe's watchful eyes weren't there, judging every step? The rehearsals began in earnest a month out, turning our sprawling backyard into a makeshift venue. Daddy had built the arbor himself from reclaimed pine, its arches draped in tulle that fluttered like ghosts in the breeze. Family gathered from as far as Savannah, aunts with pursed lips and cousins with stories polished for retelling, all orbiting Harlan as if he were the sun. Juliet played her part flawlessly, the blushing bride-to-be, laughing at Uncle Ray's jokes, accepting Mama's unsolicited advice on hem lengths with a grace that bordered on saintly. But in the stolen moments, when the crowd thinned and the fireflies rose like embers, she'd find me by the creek that bordered the property, skipping stones into the murky water. "Tell me something true, Addie," she'd say, her voice a thread in the twilight. "Something this town hasn't beaten out of you." I'd hesitate, the words tangling like kudzu, then offer fragments. How I'd once dreamed of art school in Atlanta, how the mill's sawdust haunted my sketches with its gritty reality. She'd listen, chin on her knees, the river's murmur underscoring her silences. One night, as cicadas chorused their endless hymn, she leaned closer, her shoulder against mine. "I envy that," she whispered. "The dreaming. Harlan's good solid. But sometimes I wonder if solid is just another word for stuck." Her words hung there, heavy with implication, and I felt the pull, that magnetic draw toward the cliff's edge. I wanted to ask about her own dreams, the ones that made her eyes distant when Harlan spoke of expanding the business, of roots digging deeper into Monroe's clay soil. But fear clamped my tongue. Fear of what answering might unleash. As the days blurred into a haze of checklists and last-minute alterations, the tension coiled tighter. Harlan noticed nothing, too wrapped in the glow of impending vows, but I saw the cracks in Juliet's facade. The way her smile faltered when Mama cornered her about grandchildren, the shadows under her eyes from nights spent staring at the ceiling. We'd sneak coffee on the porch before dawn, the world still wrapped in fog, sharing mugs that steamed like unspoken regrets. "Promise me you'll visit after," she'd say one morning, her fingers lingering on the handover. "When we're all settled. I need someone who sees me, not the role." I promised, the lie tasting bitter as chicory, because deep down I knew the role was all Monroe allowed. And yet, in those pre-dawn hours with the roosters just stirring, I let myself imagine a different script, one where her hand stayed in mine, where the town's teeth couldn't reach. The eve of the wedding arrived like a storm front, the air electric with anticipation. Rehearsal dinner at the country club. All starched linens and crystal that clinked like judgments. Harlan proposed a toast to Juliet, his voice thick with emotion, and the room erupted in applause that echoed hollow in my ears. She caught my eye across the table, her glass raised, and in that gaze was a plea, a fracture. Later, as guests milled under the chandeliers, she slipped away to the veranda, and I followed, drawn like a moth to her quiet flame. The night was velvet black, stars pricked like accusations overhead. "I'm scared, Addie," she admitted, leaning on the railing, the club's lights casting her in silhouette. "Not of him. Of me. Of what I'm burying tomorrow." My throat tightened, words failing as I stepped closer, the space between us shrinking to a breath. "Then don't bury it," I said, my voice barely above the crickets. Her turn was slow, deliberate, and when her hand found my cheek, the world narrowed to that touch, soft, trembling, alive with the truth we'd both evaded. Our lips met in the shadows, a kiss born of desperation and dawn's edge, tasting of salt and stolen time. It lasted only seconds, but in them Monroe's walls crumbled, leaving us raw and exposed. She pulled back first, eyes wide with the weight of what we'd done. "We can't," she whispered, but her fingers lingered, tracing my jaw as if memorizing the shape of regret. I nodded, stepping into the light, the kiss a brand on my soul. The wedding loomed like Judgment Day, and as I lay awake that night, the ceiling fan mocking my restlessness, I wondered if forgiveness was possible when the sin felt like salvation. Dawn broke over Monroe with a mercy it rarely offered, painting the sky in strokes of rose and regret as the household stirred to life. Mama bustled in the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour from biscuits she swore would seal the family's luck, while Daddy tinkered with the arbor's lights, muttering about faulty wiring like it was the world's fault for not cooperating. Harlan was up early, pacing the living room in his undershirt, rehearsing vows he'd scribbled on a napkin months ago. Simple words about forever that sounded like chains in my ears. I moved through the morning like a ghost, pouring coffee with hands that still remembered the curve of Juliet's waist, her breath warm against my neck in that veranda haze. She arrived mid-morning, whisked away by the bridesmaids to the upstairs bathroom for the ritual of curls and corsets. I caught glimpses through the banister rails, her laughter forced but bright, the way she pinned her veil with trembling fingers. Our eyes met once in the hallway mirror, a collision that stopped time. Hers pleading, mine fractured. And then she was gone, swallowed by taffeta and tradition. The backyard transformed under the relentless sun. Chairs aligned in rows like soldiers at attention. The aisle lined with mason jars of wildflowers that nodded in the breeze. Guests trickled in from the side yard, their murmurs a low hum of speculation and sentiment. Harlan's finally settling. Juliet's a catch straight out of a magazine. I stood at the edge adjusting my maid of honor dress. A pale blue chiffon that itched like guilt, smiling through clenched teeth as cousins pinched my cheeks and asked when it would be my turn. The organist, old Mrs. Landry from the choir, began the prelude, notes swelling like a tide pulling us under. Harlan took his place at the altar, tall and earnest in his rented tux, his grin wide enough to eclipse the doubts I harbored for him. I walked the aisle first, clutching a bouquet of lilies that drooped in the heat, their petals shedding like tears. At the end I turned to face the entrance, heart pounding a rhythm of dread and desire. And there she was, stepping through the French doors on her father's arm, the gown a cascade of ivory silk that whispered against the grass. Juliet, radiant and ruined, her face a mask of composure cracked only by the slight wideness of her eyes when they found mine again. The ceremony unfolded in a blur of scripture and promises, Reverend Ellis's voice booming about covenant and commitment, words that landed like blows. I stood to Harlan's left, close enough to feel the heat radiating from Juliet as she approached, her bouquet trembling in white-knuckled grip. When she reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and retreated, leaving her to Harlan's waiting hand. But before the rings, before the vows that would bind her, she faltered, a subtle sway as if the ground had shifted, and her gaze locked on mine once more, desperate, drowning. The organ hit a sustained note, the congregation a sea of expectant faces, and in that suspended breath, she leaned not toward Harlan but toward me, her lips brushing mine in a ghost of the kiss from the night before. It was fleeting, a feather's touch disguised as a near miss, but the intimacy of it seared through me, a secret shared in plain sight. Gasps rippled through the crowd, mistaken for surprise at the sweet sisterly affection. But I felt the undercurrent, the whispers that would ferment into gossip by supper. Juliet straightened, color flooding her cheeks, and Harlan chuckled it off with a brotherly pat on my shoulder, oblivious to the earthquake beneath our feet. "Always stealing the show, Addie," he said, his voice light, and the moment passed, swallowed by the exchange of rings that gleamed like false stars. "I do," she said, her voice steady as steel, but her eyes, oh her eyes, held the storm, promising a reckoning. The reception sprawled across the lawn under strung lights that twinkled like conspirators, tables laden with fried chicken and pecan pie, the air alive with laughter and the clink of mason jar toasts. I navigated it all on autopilot, accepting hugs from aunts who smelled of lavender and judgment, deflecting questions about my single status with jokes about waiting for the right plot twist. Juliet and Harlan held court at the head table, her hand in his like a prop in a play, but every so often she'd glance my way, a magnetic pull that made the space between us hum. During the first dance, as they swayed to some crooner tune about eternal flames, I slipped away to the edge of the woods, needing the cool shadow of pines to steady my pulse. She found me there minutes later, her gown hitched in one hand, the other clutching a champagne flute like a lifeline. "Addie," she breathed, the word a plea and a prayer. "Last night. I didn't mean." But I cut her off, stepping close enough to smell the jasmine clinging to her skin. "You did," I said, my voice fierce with the truth we'd both tasted. "And so did I." The admission hung between us, fragile as the fireflies winking in the underbrush. She set the glass down on a stump, her fingers finding mine, intertwining like vines seeking light. "Harlan's everything this town wants," she whispered, her thumb tracing circles on my knuckles. "But you're everything I didn't know I needed." We stood there, hands linked in the dimming light, the distant strains of music a mocking serenade. Her confession spilled then, halting at first, then in a rush. The girls in Macon she'd loved in secret, the orchard nights spent writing letters she'd never send, the marriage to Harlan a shield against the whispers that had already started when she turned down suitors one too many. "It's safer this way," she said, tears glistening like dew. "For him, for the family. For me until I can breathe again." I pulled her into my arms, the silk of her dress cool against my skin, and held her as sobs shook her frame. Sobs for the life she was stepping into, for the parts of herself she'd bury under vows and veils. "You're not alone," I murmured into her hair, the words a vow of my own. "Not while I'm here." Footsteps crunched on the gravel path, and we sprang apart, hearts racing like thieves in the night. It was Harlan, calling her name with a laugh, oblivious to the fracture. She wiped her eyes, straightened her smile, and went to him, leaving me in the shadows with the echo of her warmth. The night wore on, cake cut and garter tossed, but the kiss lingered, a specter at the feast. As guests departed under a canopy of stars, I helped pack the gifts into the bed of Harlan's truck, my mind a whirlwind of what-ifs. Juliet paused by the porch steps, Harlan already inside saying goodnights, and pressed a folded note into my palm. "Read it later," she said, her voice low, then kissed my cheek, chaste for show, but her lips hovered a beat too long. Alone in my room, the house finally quiet, I unfolded the paper under the lamp's glow. Her handwriting looped like river bends. "The secret isn't the kiss. It's that it felt like coming home. Don't let Monroe take that from us. G." I pressed it to my chest, tears blurring the ink, and in that moment, the weight of the town settled heavier. The expectations, the eyes, the unspoken rules that bound us tighter than any ring. Harlan and Juliet would honeymoon in the Smokies, a week of cabins and creeks, and I'd be left to tend the home front, sifting through the wreckage of a day that had changed everything. Sleep came fitful, haunted by dreams of orchards in bloom and hands that slipped away at dawn. When they returned, tanned and tangled in newlywed bliss, the real unraveling began. Harlan threw himself into work with renewed vigor, talking of expansions and heirs, while Juliet moved into the guest room upstairs. Temporary, they said, until they found a place of their own. But the temporary stretched, her presence a constant hum in the house, our interactions laced with caution and craving. We'd pass in the hallway, fingers brushing doorframes, eyes holding conversations we couldn't voice. One afternoon, as rain lashed the windows and Harlan napped off a long shift, she found me in the attic, sorting Mama's old linens. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said, closing the door behind her. "About you." The air thickened, charged as the storm outside, and I crossed the dusty floor in 3 strides, pulling her into the alcove of forgotten trunks. Our kiss this time was no ghost, fierce, unyielding, a reclamation of what the wedding had stolen. Her hands framed my face, urgent and tender, and for minutes that stretched eternal, the world narrowed to the taste of her, the press of her against me. When we broke apart, gasping, reality crashed back. The creak of floorboards downstairs, the life we'd interrupted. "This can't be our end," she whispered, forehead to mine. But in Monroe, secrets had a way of surfacing, and as thunder rolled, I wondered how long we could outrun the storm. Fall crept into Monroe like an uninvited guest, turning the leaves to crimson warnings and the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke from chimneys that dotted the hills. Harlan and Juliet's marriage settled into a rhythm that mimicked normalcy. Sunday suppers where he'd carved the roast with practiced ease, she'd pass the gravy with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The town approved, invitations to barbecues and bridge games flowing like sweet tea. But beneath the surface, fissures widened. I'd catch her in the garden, clipping roses with jandal that snipped too sharply, petals falling like accusations. Our stolen moments multiplied, brushed hands in the kitchen, whispered plans in the laundry room. But each one carried the risk of discovery, a tightrope over the abyss of scandal. One evening, as the family gathered for poker at Aunt Etta's, Juliet begged off with a headache, and I volunteered to drive her home. The backroads wound through cotton fields silvered by moonlight, the truck's headlights carving tunnels through the dark. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken needs, until she reached for the radio, static crackling before a slow ballad filled the cab. "Pull over," she said, her voice soft but insistent. I did, gravel crunching under tires, the engine ticking down to quiet. She turned to me then, eyes shadowed with the weight of weeks, and kissed me. Not tentative, but with the hunger of someone starving. We tumbled into the back seat, the space cramped and urgent, our touches mapping territories long denied. It was reckless, raw, a defiance against the vows echoing in my mind, but in her arms Monroe's grip loosened, if only for an hour. After, we lay tangled in the wool blanket from the toolbox, breath sinking with the night sounds. Owls calling, leaves rustling like whispers. I love him, you know, she said into the darkness, her fingers tracing my collarbone. As a friend. As the brother I never had. But this. She gestured between us, the word hanging. This is the part of me that's alive. I held her closer, the confession a balm and a blade, knowing Harlan's goodness made the betrayal sharper. He deserved the life he'd built, the stability that anchored him. Yet here I was, complicit in the fracture. We'll figure it out, I lied, because lies were the currency of our survival. The guilt festered as autumn deepened, manifesting in small cruelties. I'd snap at Harlan over dinner, blame fatigue from the mill's overtime I'd taken to avoid home. He'd eye me with brotherly concern, clapping my shoulder. You're carrying too much, sis. Let me help. His kindness twisted the knife, reminders of childhood forts in the woods, promises to protect each other from the world's edges. Juliet noticed, pulling me aside one rainy afternoon in the barn, where hay bales stacked like barricades. You're pulling away, she accused, her voice edged with fear. Don't let shame win. But shame was Monroe's shadow, cast long by church sermons on fidelity, and the sidelong glances from cashiers at the Piggly Wiggly who tallied your baskets like sins. The first real crack came at Thanksgiving. The house swollen with kin from Atlanta and beyond, tables groaning under turkey and cranberry relish. Juliet, radiant in a sweater dress, played hostess with grace, but I saw the strain, the way her laugh faltered when Uncle Ray joked about grandbabies on the way. Later, as pie was served and stories swapped, Harlan announced plans for their first house. A fixer-upper on Elm Street, white pickets and porch swing included. Applause rippled, toasts raised, but Juliet's face paled, her fork scraping china like a plea. I excused myself to the porch, the cold air a slap, and she followed minutes later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. It's happening too fast, she said, voice breaking. The house, the life. I thought we had time. We argued then, whispers sharp as November wind. Me urging patience, her demanding escape. Run with me, she said, eyes fierce. To Oregon or Vermont, somewhere the air doesn't choke you. The idea bloomed wild in my chest, visions of rainy coasts and galleries where I could paint without judgment. But reality anchored me. And Harlan? Mama? The mill. I countered. We can't just burn it down. Her silence was answer enough, the chasm between desire and duty yawning wide. She left me there, returning to the warmth inside, and I stayed until frost bit my fingers, wondering if love was worth the ashes. Winter blanketed Monroe in rare snow, turning the town into a postcard of isolation. Roads slick and schools shuttered. Harlan thrived in the hush, sketching blueprints by the fire, while Juliet withdrew, claiming flu that lingered weeks. I'd bring her tea in bed, our fingers lingering on the tray, conversations veering to dreams deferred. One blizzard night, with Harlan on a supply run to Augusta, she knocked on my door, nightgown pale as moonlight. I can't sleep, she admitted, slipping under the covers like a secret. We talked until dawn, bodies curving together for warmth, kisses soft as snowfall. It became our ritual nights when the house slept, we'd steal hours, building a world in whispers where society's chains rusted away. But secrets breed their own storms. In January at the annual Mill Gala, a stiff affair in the community hall with punch laced by contraband bourbon, gossip slithered through the crowd like smoke. Mrs. Landry, eyes sharp as her hymnals, cornered me by the punch bowl. Heard Juliet spin under the weather. Hope it's not catching. Her smile didn't touch her eyes, and I mumbled pleasantries, pulse racing. Later, Juliet overheard two widows clucking about modern marriages and women who forget their place. She laughed it off in front of Harlan, but in the truck ride home, tears streamed silent down her face. They're onto us, she said, gripping the wheel. Or close enough. The confrontation brewed through February's thaw, mud sucking at boots like regret. Harlan noticed the chill between us, the way Juliet and I orbited each other at meals, silence as heavy as humidity. One evening as he and I split firewood in the yard, axe swings rhythmic as heartbeats, he paused, sweat beading on his brow. "What's eating you too?" he asked, direct as a splinter. I swung harder, with splintering under the blade. "Wedding stress lingers," I evaded. He nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes. That night, Juliet and I met by the creek, the water high from melt, rushing like accusations. "We have to tell him," I said, the words tasting of bile. She shook her head fierce. "It'll destroy him. Us." Our lovemaking that night was desperate. A clinging in the boathouse, rain drumming the tin roof like applause for our folly. But dawn brought clarity's cruel light. A note from Juliet slipped under my door reading, "Can't do this anymore. For his sake." She moved out that week into the Elm Street house with Harlan, the distance a chasm I couldn't bridge. Days blurred into weeks of avoidance, polite nods at church, forced smiles at the market. The ache gnawed, a hollow in my chest, until one March afternoon, Harlan showed up at the mill alone, face drawn. "She's leaving me," he said, voice cracking like dry timber. "Says it's not me, but... God, Addie, what did I miss?" I held him as he wept, the brother I'd idolized reduced to rubble, and in that moment the betrayal crystallized, mine, hers, ours. Juliet's truck was packed that evening, bags bulging with half a life, and she stood on the porch, eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," she whispered to us both, but her gaze held mine longest, a farewell laced with loss. As she drove away, taillights fading into dusk, Monroe closed in, its judgments waiting to devour what remained. Spring erupted in Monroe with a vengeance, dogwoods blooming defiant pink against the gray of lingering clouds, as if nature mocked the barrenness settling in our home. Harlan threw himself into the Elm Street renovations, hammers echoing through the nights like accusations, while I took extra shifts at the mill, the whine of saws drowning the echo of Juliet's goodbye. The town buzzed with speculation. Divorces were rare as honest confessions here, and whispers followed us like shadows. Poor Harlan snagged a flighty one. Wonder what she was running from. Mama prayed harder, her rosary beads clicking like a metronome of blame, and Daddy retreated to his workshop, whittling birds that never flew. I saw Juliet once from afar at the post office, her hair shorter, shoulders squared as she mailed packages bound north. Our eyes met through the glass door, a jolt like live wire, but she turned away, vanishing into the parking lot. The note she'd left with Harlan cited irreconcilable paths. Vague enough for sympathy, sharp enough to wound. He confided in me over beers on the porch, the bottles sweating in the heat. "I thought we were building something," he said, voice hollow. But she looked at me like I was a stranger. Guilt coiled in my gut, a serpent devouring from within. I wanted to confess, to unburden us both, but the words stuck thorns in my throat. Instead, I listened, offering solace I didn't deserve. My hand on his shoulder, a poor substitute for the absolution we all craved. The unraveling accelerated in April, when Harlan's drinking turned maudlin. Late nights at the VFW where war stories masked fresh scars. I'd fetch him home, guiding his stumbling steps, the scent of whiskey sharp as regret. One such night, as I tucked him into bed, he mumbled, "You knew, didn't you? About her secret." My blood froze, but his eyes were glazed, words slurring into sleep. I fled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, staring at a reflection fractured by doubt. Had he seen? The glances, the absences? The possibility gnawed, turning sleep to ash. Juliet's absence carved hollows in the house, her laughter a ghost in the empty guest room. I found relics, a scarf in the drawer, scented with jasmine, a book of poetry dog-eared at verses on forbidden fruit. Reading them by lamplight, tears blurring the print, I traced her marginalia, tiny hearts in pencil that echoed my own hidden sketches. The art I'd abandoned resurfaced then, canvases dragged from the attic, brushes dipped in colors that bled like wounds. Greens for her eyes, blues for the creek's murmur, reds for the fire we'd ignited. Harlan noticed, pausing in the doorway one evening. "That's good, Addie. Real good." His pride stung, a reminder of the brother I'd betrayed. Town pressures mounted like storm clouds. The church ladies organized a support supper for Harlan, casseroles arriving in waves, each dish a Trojan horse of prying questions. She seemed so devoted, Mrs. Landry cooed, fork spearing green beans. Must be some city vice she brought back. I deflected with smiles, but inside rage simmered, for Juliet's exile, for Harlan's pain, for the town's ironclad script that left no room for deviation. One Sunday, Reverend Ellis preached on forgiveness, his text from Proverbs about secrets rotting the bones, and I bolted midway, the doors slamming like judgment. The breaking point came in May, magnolias heavy with bloom, their petals carpeting the yard like fallen soldiers. Harlan confronted me in the kitchen, sober for once, his face etched with lines of sleepless nights. "I found the letters," he said, voice steady but eyes wild. "In her things before she left. To a woman in Macon. And then, the drawings in your room, Addie. The ones of her." The world tilted, mugs rattling on the counter as I gripped the edge. He'd rifled through my sanctuary, my private rebellion exposed. "It's not," I started, but he cut me off, hurt flaring to fury. "Were you with her while I was blind?" The truth erupted then, a dam bursting. The kisses, the nights, the love that had bloomed in secrecy's soil. Harlan listened, face draining to ash, then stormed out, truck roaring into the night. I collapsed at the table, sobs racking me, the house echoing with the void of fractured bonds. Mama found me there at dawn, her hand on my shoulder, a tentative bridge. "He'll come around," she said, but her eyes held new understanding, the southern matriarch peeling back layers to reveal a mother who remembered her own youthful rebellions. Harlan returned days later, hollowed but resolute, demanding details in the living room under the weight of family portraits. I spared nothing, the pull from the first meeting, the wedding day's ghost kiss, the desperation that led to betrayal. He wept then, not for anger, but for the illusion shattered. "I loved her enough to let her go," he said finally, voice raw. "But you're my blood." The forgiveness was tentative, a truce forged in tears, but it cracked open something vital. Honesty long buried. Juliet's letter arrived a week later, postmarked Portland, Oregon's edge, where rains wash sins clean. She wrote of a job at a nursery, of therapy groups and community centers where women like us shared stories without shame. "I didn't leave you," she penned to me, the pages folded separate from Harlan's. "I left the cage. Come if you can forgive the wreckage." The invitation burned, a beacon in the humid haze. Summer solstice brought decisions heat, fireflies rising as I packed a single bag. Harlan drove me to the bus station, silence companionable now, laced with understanding. "Find your truth, Addie," he said at the curb, hugging me fierce. "I'll hold the fort." As the bus pulled away, Monroe shrinking in the rearview, I clutched her letter, the ache shifting from loss to possibility. The road unspooled north, toward coasts where secrets bloomed free. And in the window's reflection, I saw not a shadow, but a woman stepping into light. But light has shadows, and Juliet's welcome in Portland was wary. An apartment above a bookstore, shelves groaning with tales of outcasts, but her eyes guarded, scarred by the flight. "I hurt him," she said that first night, over takeout tie in the dim kitchen. "Hurt you?" We talked until stars wheeled overhead, rebuilding bridges with words, touches tentative as new buds. Love rekindled slowly, not in passion's blaze but embers of trust, nights spent walking the Willamette's banks, hands linked without fear. Yet echoes of Monroe lingered. A phone call from Mama, voice trembling with news of Harlan's engagement, to a widow from church, steady and kind. Joy tinged with sorrow, the cycle renewing. And in quiet moments doubt whispered. Had we truly escaped, or merely relocated the chains? Juliet sensed it, pulling me close one fog-shrouded morning. "We're writing our own story now," she said, lips to my temple. But stories demand sacrifice, and as summer waned, I wondered if freedom's price was the family we'd left fractured. Autumn in Portland draped the city in golds and rusts, a far cry from Monroe's sticky blaze. The leaves crunching underfoot like brittle apologies as Juliet and I navigated our fragile new normal. Her apartment became our sanctuary, walls papered in sketches I'd brought from the attic, women with eyes like hers, fierce and fathomless, while she tended the nursery by day, coaxing life from soil scarred by neglect. We fell into routines. Mornings with coffee black as confessions, evenings tangled in sheets that smelled of her, of us, the world outside a hum we could ignore. But ignorance is a thin veil, and the past clawed through in letters from home, Harlan's handwriting steady but laced with undercurrents. He wrote of the wedding plans, simple at the creek with wildflowers and a justice of the peace. His fiancée Clara, a schoolteacher with a laugh that cuts through the fog like you used to. Enclosed was a photo. Him beaming beside a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, the arbor in the background a ghost of Juliet's day. Jealousy flickered, not for Harlan, but for the ease they embodied, the forgiveness he'd extended without the miles between. "Tell Jay I'm glad she's found her peace," he added. "And that blood's thicker than secrets." I showed it to Juliet over dinner, her fork pausing midair, tears welling unbidden. "He's kinder than I deserve," she murmured. And in that vulnerability, our bond deepened, a tapestry woven from shared remorse. The city offered freedoms Monroe denied. Pride parades where rainbows arched unashamed, cafes with books on shelves by Audre Lorde and James Baldwin, voices that echoed our hidden hymns. We attended one gathering at a community center, hands clasped in the crowd, her head on my shoulder as speakers shared tales of coming out in Bible Belt towns. "This is what I ran toward," she whispered, but her grip tightened, betraying the scars. Nights after, we'd make love with a reverence born of survival, bodies a language of reclamation, but dawn brought the what-ifs. What if Harlan's new life crumbled? What if Monroe's judgments crossed state lines? Conflict brewed in November when Mama called, her voice crackling over the line like fall leaves. "Harlan's asking for you at Christmas," she said, tentative. "Says it's time to heal." The invitation pulled like gravity, Monroe's orbit unyielding. Juliet overheard, her face closing like a storm front. "Go if you need to," she said later, arms crossed in the kitchen. "But don't expect me to follow." The argument simmered days, words unspoken thickening the air. Me defending family as anchor, her seeing it as chain. "You think I don't miss them?" she snapped one evening, rain lashing the windows. "But going back is surrender. We fought for this." Her words landed true. Yet the pull persisted, dreams haunted by porch swings and cornbread steam. I booked the ticket anyway, a red-eye south, promising Juliet it was reconnaissance, not retreat. The flight south was turbulent, mirroring the churn in my chest, and Monroe greeted me with December's chill. The town strung in lights that twinkled like false hopes. Harlan met me at the airport, hug bone-crushing, his eyes clear of whiskey's haze. "Missed you, sis," he said, and in the truck we talked, not accusations but anecdotes. Clara's garden, the mill's new hires, the way snow dusted the oaks like forgiveness. Christmas Eve unfolded in layers of tradition peeled back to reveal raw edges. Mama's table groaned with ham and ambrosia, Clara fitting seamless into the fray, her stories of orphan students drawing laughs. Harlan pulled me aside by the tree, ornaments glinting like teardrops. "I get it now," he said quietly. "The why of it all. Doesn't make it hurt less, but I want you happy." Tears pricked, the absolution a weight lifted, and for the first time, I spoke Juliet's name without fear. "She's waiting," I said. "And I love her." He nodded, clapping my back. "Then go back to her. This town's too small for big loves." But reconciliation's path is thorned. New Year's brought a letter from Juliet, forwarded via Portland Post. "If you're staying, say it plain. I won't beg." Panic surged, the miles a chasm, and I called her from a payphone at the diner, voice breaking over the line. "I'm coming home to you." Her silence stretched, then softened. "Prove it." The return flight was a vow renewed, landing in Portland's drizzle to find her at the gate, arms open, kiss salt-tinged with relief. Winter thawed into spring, our love solidifying like sap to amber, but external storms gathered. Monroe's echoes arrived in April via a package from Mama, old journals I'd left behind, pages filled with sketches of Juliet, now joined by new ones from Harlan, rough but earnest, of Clara's profile, the creek at dusk. A note tucked inside. "Art's for healing. Send some back." I did, mailing canvases of Portland bridges and nursery blooms, bridges literal and figurative. The true tempest hit in June when Juliet's father died. Heart attack in the Macon orchard, sudden as summer thunder. She flew south alone, insisting I stay, but grief's tendrils pulled her under upon return. Nights pacing the apartment, eyes distant as the Willamette's fog. He knew, she confessed one midnight, curled on the couch. About me. Said it was God's test, but never forgave. The revelation cracked her open, vulnerability spilling into rifts, arguments over small things, silences vast as canyons. You're retreating, I accused, echoing her words from months past. Let me in. The climax shattered a July heat wave, Harlan calling unbidden. Town's talking. Some fool saw your sketches at the gallery show in Atlanta. Word spreading. Panic clawed. Monroe's jaws reopening, judgment's fangs bared. Juliet overheard, face paling. We can't hide forever. The fight erupted, words weapons. Me pleading caution, her demanding confrontation. Face them, she cried. Or we're cowards. Enraged, she stormed out, leaving me with the echo of slammed doors. Days blurred in agony, her absence a void until a knock at dawn. Harlan on the stoop, travel-worn, Clara beside him. Heard the storm, he said, pulling me into a hug. Family faces it together. They stayed a week, awkward at first, Harlan grilling burgers on the fire escape, Clara sharing books on queer Southern history. But bonds reformed, laughter tentative then true. Juliet returned on the third day, wary, but Harlan met her with open arms. No secrets left, he said. Just us. The reconciliation was messy, tears and truths exchanged over wine. Harlan admitting his own buried pains. A college flirtation with a roommate, suppressed under duty's weight. We're all misfits, he joked, and in that levity, healing bloomed. They left with promises of visits. Monroe a distant thunder now, not lightning. Summer waned, Juliet and I stronger in the forge, planning a life unbound. A house in the hills, gallery showings for my art, her expanding the nursery to heirloom varieties. But the betrayal's scar remained, a reminder that love's path winds through valleys of loss. As Portland's rain softened into August haze, Juliet and I stepped fully into the life we'd clawed from wreckage, the city a canvas for reinvention. We bought a cottage on the outskirts, nestled among firs that whispered secrets to the wind, its walls soon alive with my paintings, vibrant strokes capturing the curve of her laugh, the tilt of her head in morning light. She thrived at the nursery, her hands earthy with possibility, teaching classes on resilient roots to women seeking their own growth. Harlan and Clara visited once, the cottage filled with the scent of her peach cobbler and his off-key carols, their presence a bridge mended, not without creaks but sturdy. Monroe's changing slow, he reported over coffee. Pride flags in shop windows now. Takes time. Yet change's pace tested us. In September, an Atlanta gallery offered me a solo show, Southern Queers in Exile, the curator called it, and the pull south stirred old ghosts. Juliet encouraged it, but doubt shadowed her eyes. Don't let them reclaim you. The exhibit opened to murmurs, my pieces hung like confessions, the wedding arbor reimagined in fractured glass, Juliet's silhouette in magnolia blooms. Harlan flew down, Clara in tow, their pride a shield against the critics who decried sensationalism. A local paper ran a piece, Monroe's prodigal painter, and suddenly calls flooded, from Mama tearful with support, from Reverend Ellis offering amends. The town's teeth dulled if not vanished. October brought Juliet's proposal, not on bended knee, but over a picnic by the river, ring simple silver etched with orchard vines. Marry me, she said, not as cage but compass. Not for them, for us. Tears blurred my yes, and we wed in November, small ceremony in the nursery greenhouse, vines arching overhead like blessings, Harlan officiating with borrowed clergy robes, his vows for us laced with humor. May your secrets always be shared, and your betrayals lessons. Clara sobbed, Mama video called from Monroe, her I do echoing proud. The kiss sealed it, public and pure, no ghosts lingering. Winter deepened our roots, holidays split between coasts, Portland's twinkling strings and Monroe's hearth fires, Harlan's twins on the way adding joy's new layer. But the story's undercurrent persisted. A letter from Juliet's old Macon friend, inviting us to a reunion, whispers of community long denied. We went, Hands linked through airport corridors, the South's humidity of baptism revisited. Faces from her past greeted us warily, then warmly stories shared around a bonfire of what was turning to what could be. No judgments, only nods of recognition, lesbians who'd weathered the storm, emerging scarred but sovereign. Spring 2026 bloomed with purpose. My book of illustrations published, Juliet's Nursery expanding to workshops for queer youth fleeing Bible Belt shadows. Harlan's family grew, his letters filled with baby names and mill expansions. Clara's garden a metaphor for forgiveness tilled daily. Monroe evolved in fits, a pride event at the fairgrounds, flags fluttering defiant, but we visited on our terms, no longer exiles but ambassadors of survival. The true awakening came in June, on our anniversary, hiking Oregon's trails where wildflowers nodded like confidantes. Juliet paused at a overlook, wind tousling her hair, eyes on the horizon. "We almost lost this," she said, hand in mine. "To fear. To them." I pulled her close, the valley sprawling below a testament to persistence. But we didn't. And that's the story worth telling. Years folded forward, children not by blood but choice, fostering teens with eyes wide as our own once were, teaching them that love defies scripts. Harlan's twins called us aunts. Monroe summers filled with creek dips and firefly jars. Betrayals faded to footnotes, the kiss on that wedding day not a sin but spark, igniting paths to freedom. In quiet evenings as rain patters the cottage roof, Juliet traces my sketches, her touch a reminder. Society's standards bend, but the heart's truth endures. We are the proof, flawed, fierce forever. And in Monroe's distant echo or Portland's steady hum, the message lingers. Love, forbidden or not, is the rebellion that redeems.